Welcome to Wordpath, the show about Oklahoma Indian languages. Time and money are the two biggest factors in Oklahoma language preservation work. So tonight we're going to talk very practically about money, what it's good for, who has it, and how you can get it for your language program. I'm going to be giving an awful lot of information. A lot of addresses and phone numbers and so forth will be put on the screen. So get a pencil or start your VCR. Or remember too, if you're watching the show on a Monday, it's generally repeated on Friday at 7 p.m. So let's start with what money is good for. We all know, probably if you're trying to start a language program, you feel like you know what you need. But let's just go through some items to make sure that you haven't overlooked anything. And this will be very general. You might need a lot more than this. But you should make sure at least that you have some pay for your teacher, gas money for your teacher to come to class if necessary, money for supplies such as paper, tapes, audio or video tapes that you may be using in your program, computer or typewriter ribbons for printed things and paper to print on, printing and Xeroxing expenses. Also special materials like posters, flashcards, and so forth. We have that sort of thing here, and somebody needs to go and buy those if you don't already have them. Your blackboard or equivalent, something to write on it with, and odds and ends like paper clips, as well as expenses for advertising and postage that you might need to publicize your program. You might also want to get more extensive equipment like a camcorder, tape recorder, VCRs, tape dubbers, or computers, in which case you really need to do some fundraising. But you should remember that a lot of funders, that is people that will give you grants, sometimes will specifically exclude equipment purchases as part of what you can use the money for that you get. So make sure you check very carefully when you find out about a funder and see what it will cover and what it won't. Most government funders especially will not cover certain types of subject matter. Anything that advocates a political position or a particular religious point of view is usually not covered in government programs. So make sure you check these things out. Now, who is it exactly that can give you money for all these things that you need for your program? Let's put up the outline first that just gives the general idea of what the sources are for funding. You can get funding from the government at various levels, through school programs, schools themselves, through the tribe itself, often through churches, sometimes through independent organizations. I'll be telling you about the Intertribal Wordpath Society tonight, which is one of those. And also don't forget finally that there are alternatives to getting cash grants and then buying things. You can also get what are called in-kind donations of materials. For instance, maybe a local a dealer in educational supplies will donate some chalk for your blackboard or some paper or something like that. And sometimes people can make in-kind contributions of their time. And in language programs, it's often good to get in touch with a college or university because there may be linguistics or anthropology students who have a lot of technical knowledge about language and might be able to get a grant through their school to come and help you at no expense to yourself. So you can have a sort of internship or a placement of that sort that might help out in terms of human services to your program that can be donated in kind again. So those are some of the general places that you can go. Now let's look at some of these in detail. One of the biggest sources of big budget funding for Native American language programs is the Administration for Native Americans. I think we have an address to put on the screen for that. This is a part of the Health and Human Services Department in Washington, D.C. And they are administering grants which were authorized through the Native American Languages Act in the early 90s. And they have, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million to $2 million a year. This is to cover programs in the whole country, of course, and it's a very competitive process. And that's just a once-a-year deadline. So this is something you really need to plan for well in advance, but this is a good program to be aware of. Another good one, also at the federal level, is the National Endowment for the Humanities. And they in particular have a couple of programs that especially apply to language things. One is for development of reference materials so that if you wanted to make a dictionary for your language, this would be a very good source of funding. They also have most of their deadlines, I think, are just once a year. You need to get in touch with them at the address or phone number shown. And they'll be able to send you a booklet describing their different programs and the different deadlines. Another big one at the national level is the National Science Foundation, also in Washington. I believe we have an address for NSF. Let's see if we can get that one up. There you go, in Arlington, Virginia, in the Washington area. And it's a federal program again. This one is more likely to be geared to professional academic people. So if you hook up with a professor or researcher at a university that you're collaborating with, they most likely would apply for this kind of funding to do research on your language, and then the research can involve helping you in general with your language program and teaching people, your own people, to teach your language. So you can sort of combine interests in this way. Then at the state level, we have two things that I think all the tribes should be aware of that are useful for language programs here, or potentially could be useful. One is the Oklahoma Foundation for the Humanities in Oklahoma City. And you can call them or write them and get a description of the programs they have available. They have a number of different deadlines throughout the year, and they have rather small programs, low-value grants for like $1,000 and under, and several different levels going on up to fairly substantial ones. They are sort of the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and they handle the smaller grants and local and regional programs. Another one within the state is the Arts Council, the State Arts Council of Oklahoma, also headquartered in Oklahoma City. And they really don't specifically have it in their purpose to support language per se, but the way you might be able to get some benefit from what they have to offer is if some of the things you want to use in your language class are artistic and cultural, more artistic and cultural than merely linguistic. For instance, you're saving a certain song series or something like that, or you want to write down hymns and teach students and make videotapes of them or something like that. This might be a good avenue to get some, again, sort of small-scale funding for that kind of program. It can be very useful. And finally, let's go back to the national level for just a minute. There is the U.S. Department of Education. I kind of left that until the end because I'm not as familiar with how to get grants through them. They're in Washington, of course. I don't have much of an address there. That's about all I could get my hands on right away, but I'm sure if you mail to them at that address, you'll reach them. Probably the best strategy with educational grants would be to go through some school official. Get someone at an education department in a university to help you out, or someone at your local school board perhaps can get more specific addresses and timelines and so forth and give you an idea of what's available. We talked about schools. Don't forget to go both to school boards, from public school level, and to universities and colleges, and even VOTEX. There might be someone that you could hook up with that would help you with funding, or there might even be some funding through them directly. And of course, tribes. Tribal programs sometimes are run right as a major part of the tribal budget. On the other hand, in some tribes, people within the tribe have set up a language committee or a language and culture preservation committee, something like that, and then they get themselves to be part of the permanent budget, or try to, so that you would have a budget to work with from year to year, which at least could be seed money while you try to apply for further funding from some of these agencies. It's really good to have that baseline budget if you can. Another way to go, though, is to organize outside of the tribe, separately from the tribe, and just become your own nonprofit organization. Now, this could involve a number of steps that we'll talk about in a minute. It can be very complicated or very simple depending on how you do it. And another source, of course, we mentioned was churches. A number of churches have programs for cultural type programs. And you might just talk to your local church, or there are also national organizations connected with certain denominations that give grants on a national level. And we mentioned Intertribal Wordpath Society. We'll come back to that in a bit. And we mentioned alternatives to cash grants. So let's now say that's basically where you can get the money. The next question, of course, is how can you get your hands on that money? One of the first main things that I would recommend is that you should organize your program for fundraising. It's one thing to have a language program, but if it's not set up in such a way that it'll make fundraising easier, then it's going to be an ongoing headache. What can make it easier? Well, you need to be organized either within your tribe or independently, as I was mentioning a moment ago. Some funders that you might go to ask for money will require that you be a tax-exempt organization or affiliated with one. Now, a lot of language programs use their tribe as that tax-exempt organization. Others have hooked up with universities and gotten grant money through them, or colleges, or even independent organizations. If you wish to incorporate as a nonprofit organization, which can give you benefits with some funding programs, the simple act of becoming a corporation in Oklahoma only costs $25, and there's a 2-page application that you have to fill out. You have to come up with bylaws and give them a copy of your bylaws. And you can get information about this at the state capitol at the office of the Oklahoma Secretary of State at the Capitol building in Oklahoma City. But to really become, get the full benefits of being a nonprofit organization yourselves, you need to get from the IRS something called tax-exempt status as probably a 501c3, that's the paragraph from the appropriate code, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The application fee for that's about $150. And it's a much longer, more complicated application, but it's doable. So you might want to look into that and get in touch with the IRS and get the appropriate numbers of the publications you need to organize as a nonprofit organization. They have a special booklet just about that and special forms for the application. Next, you want to find out what's available by networking. Networking is very important if you want to raise money. Network with other people who are doing the same kind of work as you. Maybe people in other tribes who are working on their languages and may have some similar goals. Or maybe people at colleges or universities or organizations that want to support the general kind of work you're doing and will help you do your specific thing. Some ideas, here are several ideas in terms of just general networking which can pay off in the long run in terms of finding out how best to raise funds and getting the right kind of contacts to help you get your proposals together. One is SILA, S-S-I-L-A, that's the Society for the Study of the Indigenous Languages of the Americas. And the secretary, you could write the Secretary Treasurer at Humboldt State University in California. It only costs about $10 a year to join this organization, and you get a newsletter which has very useful information about not only grants that you can apply for, but other people's programs, commentary on things in the public media that relate to Indian languages, and all sorts of very interesting and useful things. It's a good organization to join, and you really get a lot of money for a lot of bang for your buck. That you can also buy a directory for $3 or $4, an annual listing of members of the organization, which you might find useful, so that you can get in touch with other people that you've heard are doing programs similar to the ones you have in mind, and so forth. Another good kind of way to network is to go to conferences. One that's coming up just in the beginning of May now. By the time this airs, you will have probably missed this year's. But the one that I'm thinking of is a Stabilizing Indigenous Languages Conference. They've had 4 of these now. It's an annual conference, and it's in Flagstaff, Arizona, at the address and phone number you see there. It's a conference especially for Native American people who are trying to preserve and teach and promote their languages. So it's just exactly what you're doing if you're running a language program in Oklahoma. It gets a lot of people from the Southwest, but you'll probably run into other Oklahomans there too, and everybody can benefit from everyone else's experience and expertise. Another good conference to go to, and this is held in June of each year, is the Sovereignty Symposium. This is held, lately it's always been held in Tulsa, and it's an annual law conference. We've given the date on a recent program, and I'm sorry I don't have it with me right now. It's the week right before Red Earth. I think Red Earth is the 12th, and so this must start that previous Monday. And this is basically a legal symposium, but there are language sessions on the first day or 2 of the conference, again, where people, mostly Oklahomans, who are belong to Oklahoma tribes, will be there talking about their language programs and telling how theirs are going, and you can get the benefit of their failures and their successes, and you can do some really valuable networking, and they may be able to give you some tips on where they've been able to find funding and things that you might try that would be good for your language program as well. Now another one, I promised to get back to this organization, and this is a new one that I really know something about. Another organization that you can use for kind of networking purposes is called the Intertribal Wordpath Society. This was just founded last fall. I am the executive director, so as I say, I'm rather intimately involved with it. Margaret Malden, who's a Creek teacher, is our board chair, and it consists of a board of 9 people, most of whom are Oklahoma tribal members, most of whom are native speakers of their languages, and most of whom have been involved in language programs themselves, so they have personal experience. We have a lot of expertise on our board, and one of our main goals is to do fundraising ourselves on behalf of language programs within the state. So we will try to get some major grants and also do just grassroots fundraising and perhaps sell language-related items and do that sort of thing, and have supporting members who send us so much per year in exchange for a newsletter and the satisfaction of having helped. And then we'll take that money and distribute it to language programs that need it, and we want to really focus not so much on things that are going on in the universities. They have their own budget lines, and not so much within individual tribes, at the tribal government kind of level, because they have their own budget and concerns and factors they need to deal with. But we really want to focus on the community language efforts, people who are teaching in their living rooms or their local church, or who are individually putting out hymn tapes or storybooks, or trying to create dictionaries or whatever it might be. We really want to help those hardworking individuals who aren't already heavily supported by some institution that's taking care of them. And there's so much going on with just no funding at all, and we hope that we'll be able to increase the funding and help people to do a much better job with a lot fewer headaches. And we also want to offer them technical expertise and sort of networking and archiving and information. Information sharing will be a big part of what we do. We'll be producing some brochures to help people figure out how to do things in the most efficient way. The next point on generally how to organize for fundraising was make sure that you document your history and your goals and so forth. If you can come up with a nice little program brochure, even if you aren't incorporated or official in any way, if you're just a group of interested individuals, make up a little brochure, even if it's just typed up and Xeroxed. Have something that you can hand people and say, well, this is who we are, this is what we have in mind. So far we've done A, B, and C, and our dream is to do D, E, and F. That sort of gives the whole picture in the background of who you are, what your experience is so far, what your plans are, and that helps enormously when you're applying for a grant to have this kind of overview, and so that people can see the context of, if they give money to this program, are these people that know how to use this money? Are they people that are kind of thinking correctly and in an organized and careful way about what they're doing, and can we trust them with their money? Because funders always want to know that. Also, keep your proposal materials on file, on computer if possible, because it's so much easier not to have to retype things and so forth. But the kind of materials I have in mind are general background about your organization, either a brochure or just a page of background information or a couple of pages, the history of your organization, things like the date when you first started to meet, how often you've met, who's been involved in the organization, and any key personnel that you feel might figure prominently in any programs that you seek funding for. Make sure you have full resumes on file for them, so that if you suddenly have a proposal deadline that comes up and by Friday you have to have this proposal in with resumes of all the involved personnel, well, you'll already have the resume on hand and you can just Xerox it or run it off of your computer. And another thing to be building up as you go along is letters of support from individuals that you're likely to be working with, especially speakers, native speakers who agree to lend support to your programs. Have letters on file from them. Get a specific letter for a specific program that really addresses that in detail if you have time, but if you don't have time, at least you can have this general letter of support on hand and you can whip out a proposal so much faster if you have all these things ready to go. Another general suggestion is start your fundraising effort immediately. Don't think about, well, next month we might start writing a grant proposal. If you plan to raise money for your language program, start today, start yesterday, because actually you can even begin with each other. You have, say, a group of 6 or 8 individuals who are starting an effort. Each of you chip in $10 and open a banking account, and you have the beginning of your funding right there. Because unfortunately, it does cost money to apply for money. I mean, I know this because having recently started the Intertribal Wordpath Society, this has become very clear that you think, well, I'll send off a grant proposal, but then you think, well, who's going to pay for, maybe I can donate my time to type the thing up or write it, but who's going to pay for Xeroxing it? Who's going to pay for the postage? Sometimes you might need 12 copies of your proposal, and if it's not a very long one, say 20 pages, that's still 240 pages of Xeroxing. So you need to be prepared to have at least a little bit of money to get your request in so that you can get the money that you really want. It's also good to think in terms of things that you might, benefit things you might support. It could be cake sales or anything, or benefit dances, traditional events. You might want to organize people who make crafts and would be willing to give you a percentage of the proceeds from crafts that they sell. I know the Comanche Language Committee has done this. So they have people interested in language who also make Comanche dolls, traditional dolls, sell them at a pretty high dollar rate, and then they split the proceeds with the language committee, between the language committee and the person who made the doll. It's worked really well for them, and they've raised some money that way. So also be shopping around even before you get any grants. Shop around and see who the cheapest suppliers in your area are for things like paper that you know you'll need a lot of, or Xeroxing. You know, if you're Xeroxing 1,000 pages, it makes a difference whether it's 4 cents a page or 10 cents a page. It makes a huge difference in the budget that you'll need. And you need to be familiar with the rates for things, because when you write a budget in a funding proposal, you need to tell them how much you're going to need to copy how many pages. Also shop around for advisors. So go to your local vo-tech college, university, also to local businesses and churches. There might be any number of sort of civic leaders, people who just have expertise in running things, are familiar with budgets, can write good grant proposals or whatever, that may not even be in your tribe or interested, you know, per se in your language itself, but they'll find your goals interesting and maybe lend you their expertise for no cost to you whatsoever. It's good to do some of this groundwork and find some of these key people that might be able to help you out before the time actually comes to write a proposal. You'll be so much better prepared if you do. So in general, plan ahead. This is an ongoing process. Sit down at your first meeting and think, what would we like to do? And list a handful of things. Don't list 37 things because it'll become overwhelming, but list a few priorities that you have. And at each meeting, look at that list of priorities, and you're going to tinker with it and change it. Decide to postpone one thing, decide to add another thing. And things will change shape a little bit. It's an ongoing process. And always be thinking in terms of general budgets. You know, is this going to cost us $100,000 or $1,000? It's good to have that in mind from the very first step before you've even applied for a grant. You also need to build fundraising attitudes. What I mean by this is you need to always be thinking like a fundraiser, and if you were like me before I started doing this work, I really wasn't used to thinking quite that way. One thing you need to always have in your mind is to have a multi-pronged approach. Never put all of your eggs into one basket. Never think, oh, we're going to get that Administration for Native Americans grant and our problems will be over. Because that's a once-a-year deadline. It might take you a year to put the proposal together. You find out 3 months later you didn't get it. And so for 15 months of work, what do you have to show? You really have nothing except you've gotten kind of discouraged. So it's good to always have 3 or 4 things cooking. Have some little grants that are easier to apply for and have a quicker turnaround. And then be planning for the big ones that take a much longer time to prepare. Be prepared for the long haul. Remember, it might take 2 or 3 tries or even more of submitting a proposal to the same agency before they finally say, okay, we think this is a good program, we'll fund it this time. I've been turned down before and then later funded for a program. So it's important not to get too discouraged. And remember, each try that you make, each time you turn in an application, it's an educational process. It's part of your training and the experience that you're building in how to apply for things. You just learn gradually how to become more successful at this business, I think. And of course, a key part of attitude is never be ashamed to ask for assistance. Never be shy. You know, step right up and say, hey, you know, we were wondering if maybe you could contribute some money to our program. If you don't ask, you're sure not going to get it. And finally, get help. There's something called the Support Center in Oklahoma City. I believe we have an address for that we can put up. That is there just especially to help nonprofit organizations to get funding and to organize themselves and to run smoothly. It's a wonderful resource. And don't forget about your public libraries and universities. Now finally, we're running a little lower on time than I'd hoped, but let me just give some key points. We have one more point listing here on how to write an impressive proposal. We'll just say just a sentence or two about each of these things. You know, what is it when the boards that read these proposals and decide who's going to get the money, when they get a stack of proposals, how do they decide which ones they want to fund and which ones they want not to? Well, of course, they want to feel that they can trust you to spend the money well and that your program is valuable and worthwhile. But you'd be surprised how important it is that your proposal be clear, neat, and organized. People really don't like to give money to messy, disorganized people because it kind of shakes their faith in how you're going to spend the money. Always be very careful to follow the instructions on the application. A lot of times the instructions are much longer than the application itself, and as tedious as it is, make sure you read everything very carefully. If they ask for 12 copies, don't send 11. You know, if they ask for it by May 1st, don't have it get there on May 2nd, and so forth. Be very meticulous about adhering to their guidelines. Usually, of course, in your proposal, you will include a brief summary and a table of contents. Again, always thinking of being very organized and clear, an introduction, an outline of your plans, a budget for your plans, and then appendices, which would include things like tribal resolutions that might support your program, letters of support from elders who will teach, resumes of personnel, and so forth. And remember, spelling and grammar count. Don't just use your spell checker either. Have someone that's good at editing go through and make sure that everything sounds intelligent. And next point, be reasonable. Set plausible goals and justify your budget. You know, if you really just need $1,000 for something, some people will tell you if you need 1,000, ask for 2,000, maybe you'll get the 1,000. I happen to think that's not a good idea, because the people who read these proposals will know what's a reasonable amount to pay for something, and if they feel your figures are greatly inflated, it's going to lose points with you in their mind. Be complete. Show that your proposal fits neatly into a developing, ongoing program. Include descriptions of everything and everyone that's critical to the project. Your tribe, your organization or committee, the proposed teachers, any teachers' aides, who will the students be, are there consultants involved, and include resumes for everyone that you possibly can. Get tips all during your fundraising process as you're developing your proposal. Don't be shy about calling the funder ahead and saying, we're preparing a proposal, this is what we have in mind, and get some reaction from them. They'll tell you, oh no, we don't allow that particular kind of expense, why don't you write it this other way? Or they'll say, yes, that sounds good, but why don't you develop it more in this direction? That's the kind of thing we usually fund. These organizations usually will help you figure out how to get money out of them. They're not there to hold on to the money, they're there to spend it, and they'll help you write a proposal that will get funded. And finally, test your proposal for clarity by trying it out on someone who's not at all familiar with your program. Because you need to remember that most of the people who read these proposals don't know who you are or what you've been doing. You have to tell it in such a way that it will become clear to them, and they'll get the picture and they'll go, aha, I see. You know, if they had a little money from us, it sure would help. This sounds like a really valuable thing to do. So I hope this has been helpful to you. We're just about out of time, and I want to wish everybody the best of luck in your fundraising efforts. Money is one of those necessary evils that we all have to learn how to get a hold of. And I hope this will help you, and that you'll get in touch with some of these funders, and that they will give you lots of big bucks. Join us next time on Wordpath.
Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita.